This is KCCK's Culture Crawl. I'm Dennis Green, and my guest today is Dale Kueter. Dale is a familiar name in Cedar Rapids. He worked for the Gazette as a staff writer and reporter for many years, but since retiring has gone into the book writing business. So first off, Dale, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Nice to see you. This is Motel Sepia. Is it your second book?
Actually, it's the fourth.
Fourth, okay.
Yeah. I had a children's book that Hide the Daddy, based on a game that I played with my own children, our own children, and then Vietnam Sons, and then a book called The Smell of the Soil, which attempts to get readers to write their own family stories, which I think is very important. Beyond just the basic genealogy, it's the stories that put life onto your family members and the people you worked with, really.
Now, your background in journalism, of course, means that you're all about stories and things like that. But one thing I have noticed is that, especially when journalists turn to writing fiction, it sometimes can be a tough transition because you're used to a pretty spare narrative style, laying everything out in a very cogent and coherent. This happened, then happened. That's how you write. That's how you write for the paper. But of course, when you're writing fiction, it's all about teasing out the details and maybe not telling the story exactly in chronological order and things like that. Was that a tough transition at all?
It was, and actually, a couple of critics online, Amazon, have mentioned that maybe a tad too many characters in the book, for example, or that the dialogue could have been a little less, been jazzed up a little bit more. I think it always is. I think you're absolutely right. It is a problem for people who work for a daily newspaper and report things to then transition to fiction. But I thought I'd give it a try anyway. I tried it with Vietnam Sons to start that as fiction, and it rebelled right off the pages.
Well, Motel Sepia is a story that takes place in Cedar Rapids back in the 50s. And they always say, write what you know, but your story is about a motel run by a black couple in the 50s. So is that something so is this, where did the germ of the story come from?
Well, actually, quite accidentally, Dennis. I was reading a story in the Gazette by Professor Lyle Henry, who at that time was teaching at Mount Mercer University. And he was speaking about Highway 30 and the Lincoln Highway at that time, and which then he got into Motel Sepia, which was located at the east end of Cedar Rapids, just outside the Cedar Rapids city limits. And there was an article in the paper the next morning, and I read the article about Highway 30 and Motel Sepia, and I said, I've never heard of Motel Sepia. And so I clipped it out, and it sort of laid there on my desk and collected dust for a couple of years while I was writing Vietnam Sons. And so then I got to looking into it in greater depth, and I thought, well, this sounds interesting story, interesting chronology of events there, and so I decided to try my hand at fiction with it as the basis.
And so tell us a little bit about the story.
Well, Motel Sepia is a trip back in time into the 1950s. Cecil and Evelyn Reed, as you said, a black couple here in Cedar Rapids, started it in 1953. Cecil was a very successful businessman here in town. He had flooring business of installing flooring, cleaning, I think, both hospitals. So they went on a West Coast trip and experienced what all black families did at that time. There were very few places where they could stay. And so when they came home, they decided to open up Motel Sepia, which took everybody, whites, blacks, anyone who would stay there. So I recreate that's a 1955, August 1955 scene in which travelers come, white travelers, black travelers come to Motel Sepia. And there's a getting to know one another kind. One of his avocations, and this reflects, the fictional character reflects Mr. Reed's background in that he had this avocation to bring white and black people together, even in a small way, in small discourse. So they're out on the front lawn, and things are rather uneasy, as you can imagine. This is 10 years before the Civil Rights Act, so things are rather uneasy. And unbeknownst to any of these travelers is that another couple staying at the hotel, and a low profile is a couple sent by the mob from Chicago to do unsavory things here in good old Cedar Rapids. And so it is this crime that sort of provides some kind of a unity element to the black and white travelers, and they have now a common thing to talk about, and so they deal with that.
Talking with Dale Kueter about his book Motel Sepia, which is just out. As a white male, was it how hard was it to get into the heads of your black characters from the 50s?
Well, it took a little research, and I have a couple from a fictional couple coming up from Belzona, Mississippi, and he happens to be an undertaker. And so on a trip down south, I stopped in Belzona, and one of the stops I made there was at a black undertaker. And so I learned the culture, a little of the culture, I should say, of black funerals, for example. And it's can be different than what whites are used to, and so that and a little bit of talking to people at the African American Museum here in town and others. But Dr. Percy Harris gave me a very good insight on what life was like in 1950 for blacks, and so that helped a great deal.
So do you have some events, signings, anything? People can get out to meet you, hear a little bit more about the book?
I do. Thank you for asking that. And October 27th, which is, I believe, a week from today, we'll be at the Marion Library at 7 o'clock. And on November 3rd at the Hiawatha Library at 6:30. And then on December 10th, we have another event at Barnes & Noble, which also involves the African American Museum of Iowa.
Okay. And then do you have a website or a place online where people can find out more or maybe get a link to get a copy of the book?
They can go to www.motelsepia.com, and it gives a synopsis of the book there and other details.
And is the book available in area bookstores?
It is. It's available at Barnes & Noble and the other bookstore, Nubo bookstore.
Next Page Books?
Next page, thank you.
Well, Dale, it sounds like a fascinating story and a time frame. Especially, we know a lot about the early days of the civil rights movement around the country, but maybe not so much here in our backyard.
Yes, that is true, and it was a time, Dennis, too, when Nat King Cole came to Cedar Rapids. I know the realtor who was back then was a representative of Decca Records, and he went to the airport to pick up Mr. Cole and brought him to a local hotel where he was told that they did not take black people. So I incorporate that in the book.
Well, it's a little bit of a microcosm as to what life was like right here in eastern Iowa in the 50s, with a crime story laid over the top of it to keep you turning the pages. Dale, good luck with it, and thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you very much, and good luck with your new book, The Traveler.
Oh, thanks very much.